Hello everyone, I'm Ms. Sneha Dani from the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies of Central Hindu Military Education Society's Bhosla Military College, and under the Social Awareness Program regarding national security and world defense policies. Here we are conducting a special lecture series regarding the current issues in Afghanistan, and the topic I have chosen is Taliban and the new role of Russia. Much has been said and written about the Taliban's hostile takeover of Afghanistan. From Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's hasty exit to US President Joe Biden's rather candid admission that the pace of Taliban's offensive took NATO allies by surprise, the fall of Kabul marked a historic shift in geopolitical equations. The overthrow of Afghanistan's democratically elected government has invited widespread condemnation. While most nations are waiting to see how the situation unfolds, some have openly expressed reservations about recognizing Taliban as the legitimate government in Afghanistan. With the situation in Kabul still fluid, the actions of three countries have piqued the interest of geopolitical analysts, that is Pakistan, China, and the new role of Russia. With the Russian past involved in Afghanistan cut to 2021, after months of fighting, the Taliban overwhelmed Afghan security forces and forced President Ashraf Ghani to flee Kabul. Anyone familiar with the enduring history of the Cold War would find it amusing that Russia's ambassador to Afghanistan recently told a Moscow-based radio station that the situation in Kabul is better under the Taliban than it was under the Ghani administration. This is the same Taliban that killed nearly 15,000 Soviet troops back in 1980s. Even more amusing was the statement made by Nikita Ishchenko, a spokesman for the Russian embassy in Kabul, who alleged that Ashraf Ghani fled Afghanistan with 4 cars and a helicopter full of cash. Ghani has refuted such claims, saying that he did not even have the time to change his shoes. One can also say it is ironic that Russia has decided to keep its embassy in Kabul open while the US has been forced to reduce its presence in Afghanistan to the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. These actions signal a significant shift in Russia's position on Afghanistan and reveal how dramatically the tables have turned since the US propped up the Afghan Mujahideen to fight Soviet troops more than 20 years ago. Recent conferences like Heart of Asia Summit and Moscow Conference were organized to resettle war-torn Afghanistan and establish a democratic process. Russia, Pakistan, and Iran supported including Taliban in the process because there are 4 such major regions. First is Taliban holds significant portion of the west part of a country, therefore it should be a part of solution. The second thing is most Taliban leaders are in the mid-40s and 50s who fought during Russian invasion in 1979. Therefore, it is natural to include them in a political process, like recent inclusion of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. The third one is rise of other groups like Tehrik Taliban Pakistan and Daesh in Afghanistan. Taliban to be included to prevent them joining Daesh and help in tackle Daesh. And the fourth one is tribal areas FATA in Pakistan are still infested with the terrorists, including camps along ill-defined Durand line which conduct terror strikes in Pakistan. In the Taliban's rapid takeover of Afghanistan, following the chaotic withdrawal of US forces this and last week, Russia sees an opportunity to step up its role as a regional power in its own backyard. But it also faces a host of risks, prompting the country to pursue dual approach. First is diplomacy with the Taliban, and the second is displays of strength along its border. The main concern for Russia is ISIS has a global outreach. It has no borders. That's why Russia sees ISIS is present in Syria, in Iraq, and even in South Asia. This is the one threat of which Russia is very mindful when it comes to the problem of terrorism in Afghanistan. Contrary to ISIS, the Taliban is limited within the territory of Afghanistan. It has to establish itself as an Afghani political force. Let's compare the Taliban and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has become a political party. People are voting for them. The Taliban could be in the same position. So if, of course, it's a philosophical and hypothetical question to some extent, but for the time being, we need to see that intra-Afghan talks are launched. However, the comparison will be more relevant. Another reason why Russia has decided to do business with the Taliban is the fact that unlike in 1990s, there are no real internal challenges to the group so far. Back then, Russia and Iran had joined hands with the India to prop up the Northern Alliance against the Taliban, but now there are no influential rebel leaders to counter the Taliban. The group has already taken charge of the northern and other border areas and neutralized nearly all potential challenges. There are reports about the anti-Taliban front forming in Panjshir under the outside Vice Presidents Amrullah Saleh and Ahmad Massoud, the son of the late legendary anti-Taliban commander Ahmad Shah Massoud. But it may be very difficult for it to find extent support or external carriage, without which it is nearly impossible to take on the Taliban. Therefore, Russia for now have chosen pragmatism over the lofty ideals and have decided to do business with the Taliban. The Kremlin Moscow appears to be willing to engage with the Taliban in order to secure its interests. Since the group took over the Kabul, Moscow representatives have continuously reached out for the talks to surge and secure its diplomatic compounds in the area. Russian ambassador to Afghanistan Dmitry Zirnov even publicly praised the Taliban on Russian state TV as, "We are now being guarded by the Taliban. They're big unit. They made a good impression on us. Adequate guys, well armed. They stood along the outer perimeter of the embassy so that no one could penetrate us. No terrorist, no crazy person." Russian President Vladimir Putin's special envoy to Afghanistan Zamir Kabulov hinted Russia might recognize the Taliban as a governing force depending on their next moves, which could be a major win for the militants. Russian diplomats have also praised the Taliban over the puppet government of Ashraf Ghani, the president who fled Afghanistan and refuted and resurfaced in the UAE. Russia only partially evacuated its embassy. Russia put the Taliban on its terrorist list back in 2003, but welcomed Taliban representative for talks since 2018, bypassing Ghani's administration. In July, the Taliban even hosted a press conference in Moscow right after US President Joe Biden's address about the orderly drawdown of American troops. Russian President Vladimir Putin has made the fight against terrorism the cornerstone of his presidency, justifying the country's involvement in Syria and backing authoritarian leader Bashar al-Assad as a way to uphold stability. But in Afghanistan, real geopolitical goals are at play as Russia is growing concerned that the movement's ideas of Islamic fundamentalism could spill over Muslim majority former Soviet states allied with the Moscow. While exploring diplomatic ways to interact with the Taliban, Moscow also made sure to project force by holding joint military exercise in Tajikistan and China near the Afghan border, with the latter aimed at demonstrating the determination and ability to fight the terrorism. The goal is not to allow the expansion of Taliban outside of the Afghanistan and to make the rule of Taliban as small as possible compared to its previous version. Russia is not interested in having a new ISIS on its border, and that is the main concern related to Russia. The Russian military also announced that Russian troops will take part in a month-long exercise with Tajikistan under the collective security treaty with regional states. Moscow has an obligation to deploy forces in case one of those states is under the attack. Another potential headache for Russia is the wave of refugees fleeing Afghanistan. Russia rarely offers asylum but might be faced with a surge of Afghans who are currently trying to get neighboring Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. They were met with a brutal resistance and the war went on for 9 years instead, killing as many as 2 million Afghani people and nearly 15,000 Soviet troops. Fighters from the anti-Soviet Mujahideen later helped set up the Taliban in the 1990s. History repeated itself as the US allied forces fled over the Friendship Bridge, the same one Soviet troops used more than 30 years ago to march out, which evoked some gloating in the Kremlin. In Moscow, the botched withdrawal of the US forces is seen as a major setback for American foreign policy, scoring points for the Putin's idea of multipolar world, which rejects US efforts to promote democracy around the world. In Russia as well as in Central Asia, the basic forecast that the government in Kabul would fall in a matter of few months has come true shockingly fast, with the irresistible Taliban offensive, but the gloomy expectations have not prompted an expansion of a collective efforts beyond some limited military exercise. While declaring the goal of promoting Eurasian integration, Russia has actually prioritized cultivating of a bilateral ties with these post-Soviet neighbors, seeking to assert its dominance over them rather than to build trust and resolve conflicts between them. Characteristically, a sharp escalation of border clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in May 2021 happened when the Russia-led Collective Security Treaty Organization was holding a meeting of defense ministers in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. In retrospect, the best opportunity for building a stable peace in Afghanistan was in a greater regional engagement, but Russia has never supported its cooperation with Central Asia, and neighbors such as Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan tend to believe more in protective barriers rather than cross-border ties. Each has set its own channel of communication with the Taliban, and Russia has also hosted several rounds of talks with the militants. But the assertion of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has the leadership of the group, still officially defined in Russia as a terrorist organization, was rational, was an exercise in a wishful thinking. The best Russian diplomats can hope for is to dissuade the shrewd leadership of the Taliban from launching cross-border attacks northwest and northwards, but the wave of refugees expected. Russia may try to request international aid on behalf of its troubled allies, but hasn't sought to coordinate responses with Iran, preferring to keep its partnership with Tehran narrowly focused on Syria. What is more surprising is the limited scope of cooperative initiatives focused on Afghanistan with Russia's paramount strategic partner China. China remains reluctant to commit resources proportional to its major stakes in regional stability, and it attempts to make the Shanghai Cooperation Organization into a key vehicle for that purpose are perceived in Moscow as far-fetched. While formally endorsing China's fast expanding economic penetration into Central Asia, Russia is concerned and upset about its own eroding dominance, and at the same time it dodging the responsibility of performing the role of global security guarantor. Russia's worldview has shifted profoundly in the last 20 years from the defensive stance shaped by the Chechen wars to the more revisionist posture explaining by the annexation of Crimea. In the former one, cooperation with the United States cantered on the countering terrorist threats was feasible and even desirable. In the far latter, confrontation with the West is the dominant feature, so every opportunity to exploit a setback for US policies has to be grasped. The withdrawal of US and NATO forces from Afghanistan is recognized as a major setback, but the problem for Russia is that it yields no rewards, and the emerging security black hole doesn't fit into and even contradicts the confrontational perspective. In early 1990s, Russia was up to the task of enforcing peace in Central Asia, and in the early 2000s, it was ready to engage in the cooperation with the United States in rebuilding Afghanistan, but presently, Russia cannot square its hegemonic ambitions with the depleted power resources. Blaming the United States for the unfolding disasters in Afghanistan will not help the countering new risks, but Russia is loath to recognize the implication of that disaster as an imperative to curtail expansionism from Syria to the Arctic and to the serious about Central Asian region. The thought of Russia is the Taliban's advance as a security boost for Russia because it would wipe out more dangerous jihadist group. The fact that the Taliban are taking control has a positive aspect to it. Why? Because most of these extremist groups are not focused on domestic matters but on Central Asia, Pakistan, or Iran. For Russia, the opportunities created by the US exit go beyond Afghanistan as it seeks to take back the power it had in Soviet era and re-establish itself as a security guarantor for a large chunk of the Eurasian continent. This has nothing to do with the Russia helping peaceful regulation in Afghanistan. This is a move to ensure the security of Central Asian states, most of which are Russian partners or allies in the face of potential hypothetical threat given the Afghan situation. It's all about the image and persuading the Russian partners in Central Asia that only Russia is capable of ensuring the security. The ultimate goal is stopping the United States and any other Western force from ever returning to this region. As a part of this, Russia has repeatedly called for the talks in the format it controls, including the Eurasian Economic Union that also includes Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and a collective security treaty organization, a military bloc involving those countries as well as Tajikistan. This time, Russia could offer advice to the Taliban on how to rule, although whether this would work was unclear. These people are hard to teach with advice. They much prefer money, and Russia is not ready to help them with money. Russia is also making inroads with Pakistan, a regional player whose special services have close links with the Taliban. Pakistan has nuclear weapons and close coordination and cooperation arrangements with China, so it deserves Russia's greater attention. Russia wants to be prepared for future scenario if Taliban fail to keep their promises on containing the spread of terrorism and radicalization. Russia could be helpful for India in reaching out to various Afghan players. Like Russia, India is concerned about the spread of extremism and radicalization beyond Afghan borders and is not in favor of establishing an Islamic emirate. The Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has noted the need for the two sides to work together to ensure that the economic, social, and democratic programs and progress made in the past years is preserved. The threat of ISIS is also shared one. Both the parties would benefit from stable Afghanistan established through political dialogue. Additionally, such a development will have a positive impact on connectivity plans of the two sides. Russia has no appetite to get involved in the ground again in Afghanistan, that much is clear. Russia has learned the bitter lessons of its past Afghan involvement. Instead, Russia is focused on bolstering the security of its vulnerable Central Asian partners along with Afghanistan's northern borders. Russia has intensified diplomatic efforts to secure a political settlement that promotes stability in Afghanistan. It has hosted talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban, with whom it has been quietly talking since 2018. Despite its proscribed status in Russia, Russia has also engaged with the other key players, notably China, Pakistan, and United States. Pakistan is of particular importance given the close and not always helpful role it has also played in Afghan affairs. Moscow has stepped up its contrast and contacts with Islamabad. With Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visiting in April this year, Russia has undertaken to intensify security cooperation with Pakistan, although Russia will be careful to manage sensitivities in neighboring India. Russia will also be watching China closely. The two countries have shared interest in cooperation to prevent spillover of Islamic extremist activities beyond Afghanistan's border. In China's case, fearful of contamination of Uyghurs in neighboring Xinjiang, but Russia will be protective of its leading security role in Central Asia, and both countries have long-term economic ambitions in Afghanistan. China is eyeing copper and rare earth mineral resources and is working to upgrade transport links through the Wakhan corridor, while Russia hopes planned construction of energy and transport infrastructure through Afghanistan will open up economic opportunities through the subcontinent and Indian Ocean region. Russia may not like having an Islamic emirate a few miles from its borders, but as long as the Taliban's agenda is local and not global, like that of ISIS, and their focus is on imposing Sharia law in Afghanistan, as bad as it may be for the local population, Russia seems to believe Afghanistan can leave it with Sharia or the laws through the Sharia. Russia's military intelligence would be kept busy monitoring the situation. The defense ministry will have to do a lot more military coordinations with the Central Asian peers. The federal security services would be preoccupied with the tracing possible rising Islamist influence in Central Asia and Russia, and the Federal Drug Control Services would put on high alert for potential new heroin production schemes and flows to Russia. But it still appears to be a better option for Russia than getting military involved in the country with no clear political goals and a huge potential costs. It remains to be seen whether this will hold true, however, as the situation in Afghanistan continues to change rapidly. But this all depends on whether security in Afghanistan can be assured. For Russia, then, much is rising and riding on what happens next in Afghanistan.